Welcome to Hard to Be Human. I am your host, Chad Rogers, and in this episode, we are going to be laying a foundation for future interview episodes where I will talk to different people about the struggles that they have faced and that they have overcome. This won't be the format for every interview that I do. It won't always be about the struggles and their overcoming them. But I have several people in mind whose stories that have really inspired me, and I think that they'll inspire you as well. So, what we're going to do today is just lay a foundation for the idea that it's hard to be whole, and that's why the episode has this name. Now, what do I mean by saying that it is hard to be whole? When people experience tragedy or experience loss, sometimes they describe it as something like a piece of me was torn away, or I lost part of myself, or I was fragmented and all the pieces of me got thrown into the wind and were scattered. And I had to go back and pick up those pieces and then put myself back together again. Now, in the movie Return of the King, at the end of the movie, Frodo is pondering the journey that he has been on, and he feels something very similar to this. And he wonders, and here's just a quote from him. He wonders, how do you pick up the threads of an old life? How do you go on when in your heart you begin to understand there is no going back? There are some things that time cannot mend. There are some hurts that go too deep that have taken hold. Now, here, he is thinking of all that he has seen, and he's thinking of all that he has done, and he wonders how he can pick up those threads of that old life. His world, his life has just come completely unraveled. Now, once before his journey, the threads of his life were weaved together. He was whole, things made sense. But now the threads are undone, and he himself has come undone. So the threads are scattered here and there, and he wonders how he can weave those threads back together so that he can be whole again. Now, let me say quickly here that becoming whole again is not the same as returning to the person that you were. I think that's part of the wisdom that Frodo discovers. He knows that he cannot return to the person that he was. Too much has happened to him. He's trying to figure out how to weave those experiences that he's had together so that he can become whole again. But he knows he will be significantly different than he was. And I think that that is true for all of us. As we move through life, we are going to change, and hopefully that change will become growth, but we're going to address growth a little bit later. So for now, we just need to figure out, how do we pick up those threads? How do we weave them back together? How can we be whole again? And that's what we're going to be exploring in this episode. We're just going to be laying a foundation so that we can begin to think about this idea of it's hard to be whole, but that is normal for ourselves to kind of be broken and scattered, and then we have to pull ourselves back together again. Now, one of the most difficult questions that humans face is called the problem of evil, and sometimes it's called the problem of pain or the problem of suffering, and I'll use pain and suffering interchangeably here. I am not going to tackle this question today, but I am going to bring it up just because you're going to hear some stories about evil and about pain, and I need to be able to just draw a distinction between the two of them to help you as you're listening to these stories, so that you, as you're thinking about the stories and as you're thinking about your own life, you'll be able to make that distinction. It's going to be important for us later. So for now, just some basics so that we can kind of get where we need to go. So evil is not a natural phenomenon, meaning that it doesn't arrive from nature. So because evil requires will or intention, so floods and tornadoes, those things, they are not evil. Even though they're harmful, they aren't considered as evil. So animals, not considered evil. They behave according to instincts. They operate according to things that are often out of their control. So dogs chase, cats pounce. It's just part of who they are by nature, or it's who they are instinctively. Humans, on the other hand, we have instincts, but we can control them or curb them or even defy them and behave in ways that might go against what seems natural to us, meaning it might go against our desires, but we have the ability to not indulge in all the desires that come into our minds. So, in short, we can choose our actions, which means that we have intention and we have will, which means that we can do things that are evil. Now, usually actions are considered evil if they're done to purposefully bring about some kind of significant harm to ourselves or to others. So, for those of you who are familiar with this topic or who are particularly logical, you're probably going to see a few hops and skips and steps that I just took as I was making this. Maybe you've even seen a couple of other paths, there are arguments that I haven't talked about, and that's fine, that's great, but for our intentions, all we really need is just this quick little description and understanding that, in short, something can only be considered evil if there is will or intention behind it. Those things are not necessary when it comes to something like suffering and pain. So why is it that humans do have these kinds of experiences, and why do we perpetrate evil on others? Now, that's one of the oldest questions that humans have been asking for the entirety of their existence. So, for example, take the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's one of the oldest surviving pieces of literature in human history. In the entire work, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the entire work is about Gilgamesh losing his friend Enkidu. And Gilgamesh, once his friend dies, he mourns, he suffers, and then he sets off on this journey trying to find immortality and trying to find answers about why we suffer and why we die. Now, he doesn't find immortality. Now, he does find a few answers about how to live, and those answers are significant. They're really interesting and fun. We're not going to explore them today. It's something we'll talk about later. But the point here is that one of the oldest pieces of literature that we have centers around the question of pain and evil, and in this case, even death. Another example, just really quickly here, is the book of Job. It's the oldest book in the Bible, and the tale may have been around even longer than before the Jews recorded it. And so the work just centers around the question of pain and evil. Job loses all of his wealth, he loses his own physical health, and all of his children die. Now, there is really then that happens at the beginning of the tale, and then a large portion of the book is just Job sitting and searching for answers. He talks to some of his friends. He even talks to God, and God talks back to him, by the way, trying to find these answers. And really the point here is that for tens of thousands of years, for as long as humans have recorded these kinds of stories, we have been asking questions about evil and pain, and here we are again today with all of our technology. We have a global economy, we have the ability to communicate with other people instantly around the world, and yet we are still asking the same questions and searching for the same answers as humans were tens of thousands of years ago. We still have things like they did. We still have things like war, starvation, famine, disease, greed, slavery, oppression, death marches, genocide. The list just goes on and on and on for things that humans suffer, both things that arise from nature and for things that come from other humans, the things that humans do to each other. Now, in a moment, I'm going to share a few stories of some of the people that I have met who have suffered tremendously. I'm going to be doing this to help to try to put a face on pain and evil. Now, we all know about our own struggles, and we know that others suffer as well, but sometimes that is just kind of this vague notion that it happens to other people, and sometimes it's not really real. I know that I had that experience where I knew of my pain and suffering, but sometimes when it was happening to someone far, far away that I did not know, then it was kind of vague and, oh, well, that's too bad. And I want to try to kind of put more of a face on this so that we can begin to understand that these are real people who are having real experiences just as much as you and I are. Now, I mentioned Gilgamesh and Job, and there is discussion and even an argument among scholars as to whether or not these were real people. So one of the questions here is, was the Epic of Gilgamesh based on a real king of Uruk? And for us, the answer is it doesn't matter. Because what I want you to do is to try to imagine that you know Gilgamesh personally. He is your friend. And his friend, another friend, dies. And you see the pain that it's causing him. You see the suffering that he's going through. You sit with him. You listen to him tell his tale about his searching for this meaning and searching for answers about suffering and about death. Now imagine the same thing for Job. You're his friend. He loses his health, his wealth, and all of his children die. You see his pain, you see his suffering. Now in the story, Job is sitting in sackcloth and ashes. It's a kind of ritual of mourning for them back then. And some friends come and sit with him there in the ashes. So imagine yourself sitting there in the ashes with Job. Imagine watching your friend Job suffer and mourn because of the incredible loss that he has just experienced. Does that kind of help put a face on the character? Can you see him sitting there mourning for all of the things that he has lost? Hopefully that kind of helps it more real. I know that when I was younger, I loved history, but it wasn't till I was probably about 10 that I began to fully appreciate that the people that I was reading about were just as real as I was. Even though many of them were already dead, they spent their days, while they were alive, they spent their days much like I do. And their lives were not relegated to the events that I was reading about. They lived every hour of every day just as I do. And they spent more time doing mundane tasks rather than remarkable ones, just like I do. They cooked, they cleaned, they played games, they had conversations about, their day. Hey, how was your day? All the things that happen to us happen to them. Those things are not recorded in the history books because they're normal or they're unremarkable, but they lived every single hour of their lives just like I live every single hour of my life. And for them, my normal and their normal are really pretty much the same, in the sense of that we are all just going through having this human experience. So when I talk about pain and evil, it's very real to me in the sense that all pain and all evil are someone's pain and evil. If someone has suffered, it's real to them, it's personal to them. Now this took away some of the vagueness and some of the impersonal nature of what my understanding had been, and it put into my head that other people's suffering is just as real as mine. Now I want to tell you a few stories about some people that you have almost certainly not met to try to further put a face on this kind of pain and suffering. This will not be the only episode that is titled Hard to Be Whole. Some of the guests that I'll have on, as I said, they're going to share their stories about struggling in pain and suffering. Now, I don't want to give away the ending, but let me just say that I'm not doing this. I'm not telling these stories to try to depress you or to cause you despair. Hopefully, you will take from them what I have often took from them, and that is inspiration. Hopefully, it will offer some direction on how to handle pain and evil for yourself and even for your loved ones as they experience loss and as they suffer as well. So also, just really quickly, and we're going to address this further later, but just for now, I want to encourage you that you're not alone in your suffering. I know that when I was in college, I went through multiple depressions, and I remember in one of those depressions feeling like I was the only one that was suffering like this. And the answer is no, 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 I wasn't. In a few episodes, or in a future episode, I'm going to bring my wife on, and she's going to tell her story. And she had the same experience with some of the struggles that she was facing. She thought she was alone as well. So if you're thinking that you're alone in some of the struggles or the pain or the suffering that you're going through, the answer is no, you're not. Other humans have gone through this just as you have. And that's not to diminish your evil or the suffering or the pain that you're experiencing. That's just to encourage you to say, others have gone through the same thing. And if you need help, you can search out those people who have that similar experience, who can relate to you. And it's a very healing experience when you begin to share and you begin to realize, I'm not the only one. So, but for now, onward to the stories. In 2001, I was in Russia. In January, I was in Russia for 2 weeks. It was really cold, as you would expect. But a group of us were there, going to orphanages, to old folks' homes, delivering things like toothpaste, shampoo, soap, those kind of just basic hygiene supplies. We also handed out like small stuffed animals and toys, that kind of stuff to the kids. We were doing that because the Russian government was focused on trying to keep up with the U.S. military, but they couldn't afford to do so. So they took those kinds of things from the orphanages and from the old folks' homes and they gave them to the military. And I remember one little orphan girl in particular. I have a picture of her holding this little stuffed animal that I gave her. It was a bright red parakeet, and her face was absolutely lit up. She had this huge, just beaming smile as she's sitting there holding this, this stuffed animal, that parakeet. On that trip, I saw hundreds of orphans, and she always stood out to me. Just her face and the expression that she had holding that parakeet. She was so excited. She was so happy. And for me, her face became the face of orphans. So whenever someone began talking about orphans, not that that happens a lot in conversations, but whenever someone started talking about orphans, I always saw her face. Her face became the face of orphans for me. Now, life for a Russian orphan is difficult for several reasons. And I remember a couple of the orphanages that we visited, the kids' heads were shaved because they had had a lice outbreak and they didn't have the ability to handle it like with shampoos or anything. So they just shaved all the kids' heads. It was hard to tell the boys from the girls. And there weren't a lot of hygiene products, as I mentioned. I was grateful that I was there in January so that the body odor was relatively in check. Food was not plentiful. None of the kids were starving that I saw, but they were all thin. The buildings that they lived in were livable, but they were not of great quality, and they were almost always crowded. Now, none of those sufferings is why I'm telling this story. The real reason has to do with the future of these orphans. They don't have a lot of prospects. We were told that 60% of the males would be in the military by the time they were 18 years old, and the Russian military is not a pleasant experience. But more significantly and more tragically is the future prospects for the girls. We were told that 80% of the girls would be prostitutes by the time they were 16. Knowing that, it was incredibly difficult to go to the orphanages and to see the kids' faces. We would hand out gum, and I remember sitting and watching them chew their gum and play with the stuffed animals. And it was really difficult knowing their probable future. Now, the hotel that I stayed at in Moscow had two lobbies, one on the left and one on the right. And every night when our team came back to the hotel, there would be about 10 prostitutes sitting in each lobby. And so for many of those little girls, this was their future. They would be those prostitutes sitting there in hotels waiting for someone to hire them for that night. Now, I kept that picture of the little girl with the parakeet on my shelf or on my desk, somewhere in view. I kept it there for years. And then one day I saw it and I was thinking about her, and I realized how much time had passed since I had been in Russia and since I had taken that picture. She was about 10 when I took the picture, and it had been over 6 years since I took it, which means that she was probably 16 or older by that time, and there was an 80% chance that that little girl was a prostitute. I remember putting the picture in a box for years because I couldn't look at it. And then eventually, and now, it's out of the box and it's on a shelf again. It's still hard to look at, but I keep it there. As I said, her face became the face of orphans for me. But now her face is also the face of prostitutes for me. So when I see a prostitute, or a homeless person, or a drug addict, or just someone who's desperate because of their life circumstances, I always wonder how they started and how they got there. How did they come to this? What brought them here? Now, when children are asked what they want to be when they grow up, none of them say that they want to be a prostitute or a drug addict or homeless. These are not goals that humans aspire to, and yet billions and billions of humans throughout history have suffered these kinds of things in their lives. Sometimes it's their fault because of their choices. Sometimes it's not. Either way, it's just a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. Now, one more story. That was in Russia. This one's here in the U.S. So while I worked on my master's degree, I was a tutor at the Boys and Girls Club in Fort Worth, Texas. I was there for 3 years. I was working with mostly inner city kids. And for me, having grown up in the country, in the mountains of southeastern Oklahoma, yes, there's mountains in southeastern Oklahoma, very secluded, not a lot of people. So when I started working with inner city kids, this was a real education for me. I was one of 2 white males working at that location. All the other workers were black or Hispanic, and most of the students were black and Hispanic as well. In this case, it just so happens that the student that I'm going to be talking about was white, but she is actually the only white student that I recall working with in those 3 years that I was there. I was a normal tutor for a year, and then meaning that I just tutored, students, groups of students, or in particular topics, usually topics that I was most familiar with. But after a year, they made me a special tutor, and that really just meant that I was handling cases for students who needed special attention because of particular problems. And usually that meant one-on-one tutoring because they just needed that. Tutoring them in a group wasn't adequate. They needed more attention, and so they would send those students to me. One day, they brought a girl to me. She was probably 14 or 15 years old. I'm just going to call her Alice. She was very thin and very small. It was odd. It was curious to me. She had dreadlocks, and she had blue yarn weaved through those dreadlocks. And as I said, she was white, so it was kind of odd, at least back then, that she had dreadlocks at all, but then the blue yarn really stood out as well. And why blue? It's interesting, it's odd, it was curious. But it marked her And what marked her even more was the fact that she wouldn't look at me. She wouldn't look at me or anyone else. She would never make eye contact. She kept her eyes to the ground and she would not look up. And she would not speak to me or anyone else. Now, I don't remember what topic I was tutoring her in, and probably I was probably tutoring in all of them. But I remember sitting with her and I would explain something, then I would ask if she understood, and she would just kind of keep her eyes down and shake her head, yes or no. And so uh, she wouldn't look at me, she wouldn't speak to me. All I got was a head shake. Now, I can be really cheesy and kind of corny with some of the stuff I say, even when I'm teaching. It's just kind of part of my, I'll say, charm. And I was like that with her. I just treated her like she was any other student. I'd been tutoring her for probably a month when I made another silly comment, and Alice kind of turned her head slightly toward me and she cut her eyes a little bit and she got the smallest of grins on her mouth. Now, almost instantly, she realized what she had done and she tried to go back into her shell, but it was too late. I had cracked her. And so within a few weeks, she was smiling and she was talking to me and she was looking at me. She told me that she wanted to be a tattoo artist, and she brought some of her sketchbooks to show me her drawings, and she was really good. Um, she had a very large number of flaming blue skulls. Now, if you know the character Ghost Rider, think of how the flames play on his head, but then make them blue, and that she had a lot of those. And I've always wondered if the blue yarn and the blue flaming skulls somehow had something to do with each other. But I never asked, and I never figured out if there was and what that relationship might have been. But as I said, it was an incredible transformation from this girl who would not talk and would not make eye contact to suddenly this very normal young lady who was sitting there having normal conversations as I tutored her and then just shared her life. Now, one day, I was standing at the back of the club. It was in an old Sears building. This was in a mall, kind of a really old, rundown mall in Fort Worth. And I think this was probably a Sears clothing room. And so it was really, really long, right? And I was standing at the back, and this lady walked in the front door, and I'm just back there eating a handful of grapes, right? Just kind of watching kids, not doing anything. Uh, and this lady walks in and asked the receptionist a question, and the receptionist pointed to me. And so obviously this lady needed to talk to me. So I was in a really secluded place. So I just sat there eating my grapes, stood there eating my grapes, and waited for her to come to me because it was a good spot to have a private conversation. So this lady got, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 feet away from me. And in a very firm tone, but not loud, she asked me, "What did you do to my daughter?" Now, few things will scare a man in my position more than something like that. I'm a male in my mid-20s working with high school students. Any accusation on the part of the student can radically change my life, and not in a good way. So, I mean, I'm terrified, and I did exactly this. Actually, I threw my hands up in the surrender position, and I was like, "Oh, I didn't do anything to anyone's daughter." And later, as I thought about my reaction, I always thought that I must have sounded absolutely ridiculous, but it didn't matter because she took about two more steps and she broke down crying, and her shoulders slumped, and she was just just suddenly I knew that this was not dangerous. I wasn't in any kind of danger, but that something incredibly significant was happening as I was about to have this conversation. The woman told me her story. She'd been married several years earlier. They were living in California. She and her husband used drugs. He used more often than she did, and he was quite addicted. And so one day he came home. He didn't have the money to get his drug fix, and he looked at her and jokingly, but watching her to see what kind of reaction she had, he said, "You know, we can get $200 a piece for these kids in Mexico." Here was a father who was willing to sell his children into slavery for a drug fix. Now, she told me that she took her kids and she ran. And she had been running for years. She had a minor mental disability that meant she could only work jobs like being a janitor. She and her children were living in abandoned houses, and they could only live there for so long before the police would be called and they would come and take her out of the buildings that they were living in, and then they would be on the move again. And a lot of times that meant a different city, trying to find another job, and they had been doing this for years as she was hiding from her husband and just trying to survive with her and her children. As she told me this story, Alice began to make sense. Authority figures, especially males, were a consistent and a constant threat. Beginning with her father, who wanted to sell her into slavery, he should have been a protector, but he became a danger. Police officers were constantly removing them from buildings and putting them out of that shelter, out of the thing that they were trying to live in, the thing that was their home, were constantly moving them along. And she began to see authority figures as dangerous. I remember in a conversation one time, she told me that she was an anarchist. She believed that there should not be any rules, no one should be in charge, no one should be in control. And I could see why she would come to that conclusion after hearing her story. And it was no wonder then she wouldn't look at me and she wouldn't speak to me. I was an authority figure. I was a threat. I was dangerous. And that's why it took me so long to crack her. I was working against a lifetime of training. But that's why her mother was there to see me. It was because I had cracked her. And her mother told me that her daughter was radically a different person. She had friends from school. She was passing her classes. She was interacting with teachers and other authority figures. And so as her mother stood there in tears, and as I was standing there with, nothing to say, as I heard the story, it just began to make sense. Now, I don't think I fully grasped what was happening until days later, and I don't remember really how the conversation ended. I vaguely remember her mother walking away after she'd finally stopped crying. I never told Alice that I met her mother. I never told her that I knew her story. What I do remember is that a short time later, Alice stopped coming in for tutoring. I never knew for sure what happened, but my guess is that they went on the run again. I've never known what became of her. Now, why these stories? Well, in a podcast called Hard to Be Human, things like this are certainly going to have to come up. It's sad to say that these types of things are not uncommon, and they never have been in all of human history. And I like to say this as I talk about these types of very difficult lives that people have led. I like to say to my students, welcome to the human race. This is what we do to each other. Now, I could say that's the bad news and here's the good news, and that's absolutely correct. So that was the bad news. Here's the good news. I expect that you have all heard of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but there's also something called PTG, post-traumatic growth. So post-traumatic stress versus post-traumatic growth. And as the name implies, it is exactly what it sounds like. Many people go through a traumatic event and experience stress disorder. On the other hand, many people go through traumatic events and they experience growth. Now, the growth is almost never immediate. It's not like, you go through something traumatic and immediately you walk out of it with a positive mindset or a positive experience or some type of growth in your pocket. It was probably going to take years to take that event and make it into something that propels you forward, allows you to become stronger, allows you to become a better person. For me, I remember with my friend that died, it was years before I began to understand that his death had pushed me to search for answers. And in that searching, it eventually drove me to something that was good. It drove me to something that was positive. And I took that and I grew from it. I didn't know what I was doing, but I took that trauma and it pushed me in a good direction. So it's post-traumatic growth. Now, this type of topic, post-traumatic growth, always reminds me of the Nietzsche saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I would amend his saying and I would make it more, what doesn't kill you can make you stronger. I would change that because sometimes the things that don't kill you can cripple you. They can cripple you physically, emotionally, or mentally. And so, yeah, it might not kill you, but it might drive you to madness, for example, something like that. And that's not making you stronger or better. It's not growth. So it can make you stronger. And the point here really just is that struggles make us stronger, or at least they can make us stronger if we don't let them conquer us. We can take our struggles and become determined to overcome in spite of or even because of what we have experienced. So in a moment, I'm going to share a list that I've compiled of famous people who have overcome a lot of struggles and who have succeeded. Now, I never know if I should say that these people have succeeded in spite of the struggles that they've seen or because of the struggles that they have experienced. I don't know. I can't speak for these people because I don't know them personally. So I really just kind of have to leave it at that. Do they do it in spite of or because of? Combination of both? Don't know. But for you, you have to begin to look inside, reflect on yourself, and think, try to decide which will you experience. Will you experience PTSD or will you experience PTG? I know it's not that simple for us, but for here and now, just for the sake of argument and just for the sake of trying to learn something, to try to see something just for a moment, let's make it that simple, okay? Let's make it that simple. I understand it's simple, but it's not easy. So we can gain understanding, and that gaining of understanding is mindset. So your mindset begins with a decision. The first step is to decide whether your struggles and your tragedies are going to hold you back or whether they're going to inspire you and drive you to succeed. Now, you won't gain success simply because you make the decision to, the conscious decision to succeed in spite of the things that have happened to you. Making the decision is not adequate. There's more to it. You're going to have to begin to pursue success, and hopefully, eventually you'll find that success as well, but it begins with the decision. I'm going to take my struggles and I'm going to use them to grow myself. And it begins with that decision. Now, the list of famous people, I'm going to rattle through this really, really quickly for the sake of time, which means I'm going to tell you the name of the person and then give you their struggles really briefly. I'm not going to elaborate. And that doesn't mean that their struggles are small or insignificant. If they were small and insignificant, I wouldn't have put the person on this list. These are major struggles. They're major things that these individuals overcome. So here we go. Quickly, the list of people. Helen Keller, blind, deaf, and mute from birth. Einstein didn't speak until he turned 3, was considered lazy by his teachers when he was in school, and couldn't get a job in physics until 2 years after graduation. Tom Cruise grew up in poverty and had an abusive father. Oprah grew up in poverty, was raped at the age of 9. She had a child when she was 14. The child died as an infant. Nick Vujicic, born without limbs. J.K. Rowling, she in childhood struggled through poverty. There was family illness. There was an abusive relationship that she suffered through. She suffered through depression and considered suicide. Benjamin Franklin, his parents couldn't afford to send him to school. He had to leave when he was about 10. He went out and educated himself. Vincent van Gogh sold one painting during his life. I love this one. He sold one painting in his life. He painted over 900 works of art. He would just go out and paint, and he never sold it. And you imagine how discouraging it would be, trying to make a living. 900 works of art, he sold one in his lifetime. Absolutely amazing. That he just stayed with it. He kept going, as it was his passion. It was that thing that he wanted. Rowan Atkinson. You probably know him best as Mr. Bean, so a comedian. He's got a lot of other really brilliant works that are out there as well. He has a stutter. He cannot say the sound for B. And yet, one of the greatest comedians, in his era, in his prime, one of the greatest comedians. And again, just overcame this stutter. Others, famous people who have significant struggles, I'm just going to list their names here. Stephen Hawking, Bethany Hamilton, Jim Carrey, Franklin Roosevelt. The list just keeps going on and on and on. Hopefully you get my point. We know about these people. We know about them because of their success, but they struggled through incredible obstacles, through, in many cases, incredible evil, and in all cases, through a tremendous amount of suffering. Now, these are famous people who overcame adversity. I'm going to be bringing on none of them to my podcast, but I'm going to be talking to a lot of just people, normal people who have overcome tremendous adversity in their lifetimes. I already brought 2 of them to you today. Hopefully, hearing the story about the Russian orphan and Alice, maybe you kind of helped you, like I said, to put that face on evil, on suffering, and begin to realize that it's more than just us, to get you focused outside of yourself so that you're not so myopic, you're not so short-sighted, and you're not really just looking only at yourself, but beginning to see the others as well. Now, what should you take from this episode? I know it's not as simple as deciding that you will overcome, right? I already said, make that decision as to whether or not you're going to grow from these things or whether they're going to hold you back. I know it's not that simple. But for many of us, that is the first step, deciding I will do this thing in spite of the obstacles, or I will become this kind of person because of the obstacles. or in spite of the obstacles that are in front of me, or in spite of the suffering that I have faced, this is the person I will become. You have to determine if you're going to be held back by these experiences or if these experiences are going to propel you forward. So, what you should take, hopefully, you take from this episode, is a potential for a beginning. Begin to reflect on your struggles, your trauma, your grief, obstacles, whatever you want to call them, and decide what part those things are going to play in your life. And maybe realize and appreciate the part that they have already played in your life. Maybe you've already overcome. Maybe you didn't really think about it. Maybe you hadn't thought about it until now, suddenly realizing, oh, that thing that was so harmful to me was also now very helpful to me. The opportunity for this beginning, if you're in the beginning, is just an opportunity to harness these kinds of experiences and to use them to help take control so that you determine what part of your life they will play. Now, I want to end with something that I use at the end of some of my classes, and I'm doing this because I feel like these kinds of discussions can be depressing, but I hope what I will share helps you see slightly differently. I remember the first time I heard this thing that I'm about to share with you, and it kind of made me see things differently. It left a huge impression, obviously, because I heard this like back in 2004 probably, and here I am sharing it with you today. So obviously I remembered it. It was significant to me. Hopefully it will be significant to you. What I want to share is a Franciscan blessing. Now, if you're not familiar with Franciscans, they are Christian monks. So this is a kind of prayer that monks would pray for other people. Now, if you don't believe in God or if you're not Christian, I think you're going to like this anyway. It's not specific to Christians or even just believers in general. If you don't like the idea of prayer, I still think you're going to like this anyway, because what I would say to you is, if I had something that I could hope for you, that I could hope into your life, much like I hope for the Russian orphan and much like I hope for Alice, I hope that their lives, that they have grown through the struggles that they have experienced. This is something that I would hope for you, that you would come to have in your life. And so here we go. May God bless you with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that you may live deeply within your heart. May God bless you with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that you may work for justice, freedom, and peace. And may God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, hunger, and war, so that you may reach out your hands to comfort them and turn their pain into joy. And may God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in this world, so that you can do what others claim cannot be done. Well, I hope that this episode has given you hope rather than depressing you. And future episodes, as I said, we will meet and talk with people who have faced significant struggles and have overcome. It can be difficult to listen to and think about people and their struggles, so I am glad that you stayed with me to the end of this episode, even though it might have been difficult. And of course, it is difficult to hear these stories, but then what would you expect? After all, it is hard to be human. If you found this value in this podcast, please like it and share, and I will see you next time.